dim the light I see here. Well, thank you so much, Helen, for this beautiful introduction. I was here actually 5 years ago also at this conference, and it was fantastic to see all the new visions that came out. And today also I heard a couple of new things, and especially also a couple of things that kind of put everything together, because in my own career as a board woman, I see this pattern of how men talk and how they take up the room when you actually want to say something yourself and not being heard. It's the problem of not being heard, I think. And we as women need to work on that because we need to be heard. What I will do today is actually to talk about some of the best practices that I've seen in my career to advance women in management. And you here see a beautiful picture of beautiful, colorful ladies, because a big part of my career, my management career, was actually in Asia. I became ING Group's first female to be an expatriate to Asia as regional director for Southeast Asia, and my husband went with me. So, the role reversal thing. Very interesting, especially for my husband. It was more complicated for him than often for me. So I'll talk a bit about that. So I'll also talk about a bit about my own experiences, and then I will talk about a very recent study that we did for CEC European managers. Not sure if you've heard of that. It was also on a link on the website. CEC is one of Europe's social partners, and they deal with the issues regarding managers. So their membership is about 1.5 million, so spread across Europe. So the report will get an enormous audience. So I'll talk a bit about that too, about some of these best practices. Let's see. Yes. Well, as I said, my career in Asia. In Asia, I learned that actually the connection between East and West in the old days created prosperity. Because we all know about the Silk Road, connecting the East and the West. And both in the East and in the West, prosperity materialized. And I think that's the same with women and men in management. As soon as you have a team where both are part of it, then you start seeing results. Then you start seeing an added value. You create prosperity, as far as I'm concerned. So this connection, I think, is a very important connection. And what I learned in Asia is how do you deal with people who are different from you? Because if you go to Asia, there's a very different culture. And I was very successful as a manager in the Netherlands, but if I would just take my Dutch behavior and then, sit in the boardroom with the Thai people, it's not going to work. So I learned how to treat other people differently and also how to be seen as different. Because it's not only that I see other people as different, they also see me as different. And during those years, I also very much became aware that I was not only Dutch, but I was also a woman in that environment. So I became very sensitive to the cultural differences, whether these are cultural differences in countries, between countries, because Asia is not one culture, it's very different cultures. If you look at companies, they have very different cultures. If you look at all kinds of organizations, they have very different cultures. So each and every time we are, as managers, we are in positions in which we are a different person towards many of the others. So how to deal with people who are different, and also how to deal with people who see you as different, men. That became my focal point actually in my career, and that's why I started the Center for Inclusive Leadership. Because I think, and you see, this can turn, this thing, mobile is called, a mobile. When you have more balance and diversity, you create a movement of minds. Because as soon as you have more diversity, more diverse viewpoints, you will actually start analyzing an issue in a different way. And that same goes, by the way, for women's organizations. I have been co-founder of a number of women's organizations and leading the board with only women. And also there are traps towards having only women at a table. And that can be as dangerous or as unproductive as having only men at a table. So this is my life's story in a way. And what I've observed is that there are within companies actually two career paths. One, to the left, is the kind of hierarchical path which people, especially men, like because it's a very hierarchical structure. These are military boots, as you can see, you know, so it's about force, it's about making sure that you get hurt. Whereas the other line is the female line. I think women actually have more winding careers. You know, they sometimes take time out or work part-time for a number of years. So there's far more flow in the way that women structure their careers. And these are very different patterns. And what we're now observing is that companies are seeing that more and more men also want to have those more curvy patterns in their careers. So we are moving from a kind of hierarchical world with hierarchical companies to companies that are more networked, that are more circular, which is, you know, especially what we women like. So we are moving towards a world in which women, I think, are going to be better supported in their career advancement. Oh, there, yes. And what I have observed is that if you look at women's careers in those companies, they are excellent at executing tasks, at performance, so doing the job 110% or 200%, but they do not tend to spend a lot of time on promotion, which is self-promotion, so how do you actually come across, and power, which is networking, which is how are people seeing you as a powerful person, or are you being seen as someone who is nice but not so powerful? And within companies, you see that those that are able to first start with a good performance and then build on power and promotion competencies, that they will move from middle to senior to top management. However, a lot of women, and I'll show some figures, get stuck in middle management because they continue to do the performance focus. They continue to want to know everything in their field. They continue to want to be 100% safe all the time. And you can't do that. You only can allocate your time once. So you need to also allocate time to promotion and power competencies. So, oh, this is a bit, well, it's still readable. So this is the study that we did for the CEC European managers. The pyramid of the lost women, that's how I call it. So you see at the bottom of the pyramid there's a huge women's workforce. Then you go to junior management, it's becoming smaller, etc., to top level. And for me, top level is executive board level, which is the highest executive position. It is almost non-existent. And you see this, for instance, in European Union, 65% of women work. But if you then go to the executive board level, it is about 9%. If you go to the CEO positions, it's about 3%. So on all these levels, we have lost women, you could say, the pyramid of the lost women. So what we did for the CEC managers was to interview a number of companies, and I'll show you a couple of best practices, on two themes. The first one was, okay, so what do you think is the business case for gender diversity in your company? Why are you going to do a diversity and inclusion project? So what is the rationale behind it? And the second part was, okay, you have the rationale, so then how are you going to do it? The instruments, the tools, the techniques. And what we also added were two very prominent questions, which we often hear. One is, how do you actually deal with resistance from men, and sometimes also women, if you put in place diversity and inclusion policies? Because there can be resistance. How do you deal with that? And the second one was, how do you deal with women's modest behaviors? You know, women not being too forward in putting themselves forward. How do you deal with those two? So I was asked to interview the top level of these companies, and these are big companies. And the interesting thing is, those of you, and there were many who actually also were here in the first session this morning, and we talked about images and how things were being perceived. I will show you, this is the report about promoting women in management. And when we actually asked the marketing company to put it together, they actually had a woman in pink, smiling with a very nice smile, because they thought that would be the appropriate cover for this report. But I stopped that. I said no, because who do we want to actually reach? 1.5 million managers, probably 90% men. And they're not going to look into a report that has this beautiful smiling woman about, oh, promoting women in management. No. So it's also about adapting and being smarter, I think, to make sure that you're going to get heard, and in this case I'm going to be read, to adjust. So, and this report is free, available. If you want to have it, you can either download it or send me an email and I'll send it off to you. And it contains a lot of best practices. And let me first start with, I'll do four companies. Accor, H&M, Sandvik and T-Systems. So I'll first start with Accor. And it was very special to talk to Accor, because they have one woman on the executive board, and she is also the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, which is one of the most important roles. She was also the one who started the Accor Women's Network. And Accor did not have a women's network until 2012, so until 3 years ago. And why didn't they have it? Because the men didn't think it was important. The men at executive board level. So only when there was a woman at executive board level, she could make sure that it was seen as important. So even if she's the only one on the board, she still had an enormous impact, because she founded this women's network within the company. What Accor also did was they developed a group diversity policy. They included all the regions and all the countries. So they worked for about a year. They translated the diversity policy into 13 languages, very localized, because of course as a hotel company you have a lot of local hotel managers. So it's very important that it would actually also be accepted by all these different cultures. What they also did was they included diversity training for employees, and not classroom style like this, no, e-learning modules. And I got one, I was able to actually test one, and it was quite funny also. And what they do, they make a kind of game out of it. And by that they teach their employees how to actually be more sensitive towards gender diversity in certain situations within their hotel company. The mentoring program is a very important program now. There's more than 90 pairs already. And what they do, there's a lot of benefits in that mentoring program. The first one is the women say, we finally start to understand the unwritten rules within the company. And also we start to see what is actually the path to the senior management. So they're going to get clues about how actually to move upwards. And the third benefit they said was their network. They were getting so many contacts now across the company that they were much easier to network across company. So very important, those three types of best practices, but in the report there's many more. And I've put two quotes there, which you can read. You have to speak the language of senior management and use facts and figures to convince them of the benefit diversity brings. So Accor also embarked upon research about stereotypes. And they found that only with that research they could convince senior managers, male managers, of the benefits. So it's a very, very intellectual approach actually. But also they had some very practical best practices. For instance, if there was a list with candidates for promotion and there was not even one woman, the diversity manager said, I always ask, where are the women? And she would send back the list. So very practical ways of, best practices. Another big company, H&M. You all know H&M, of course, from clothing. And they have a huge, I think, 170,000 employees. And almost 90% of those employees are women. But then if you look at their executive board level, it's only 37.5%. So somewhere along the way, also in a company that is, a fashion clothing company is really kind of women's business, you could say. Even if at the bottom there's a lot of women, they also do not reach the top. And at country management level, which is senior management, they had about 50-50. So also at a company like H&M, they don't even have a diversity and inclusion policy, they only have a non-discrimination policy. Because they say diversity and inclusion is actually in our genes, we already do that. But then if you confront them with the fact that they don't have so many women in top management, of course, the story is different. What they also did, again, is a mentoring program. I mean, that seems to be one of the top best practices within those companies that we researched. Mentoring program to create awareness around the experience of the women within the culture of the company. And what they did, it was very, very interesting. They had an intranet in which they showed a lot of tools and techniques, and also some videos and movies to promote gender diversity within the organization. Especially senior women would talk about their personal experiences. So, for instance, for being sent abroad and how did that work, etc., etc. So, and I have listed 3 of my favorite quotes from that interview, from those interviews. It is important to make everyone understand that gender balance teams are more dynamic and in line with modern times. The world is changing and becoming global. If we want to understand the world, we need to have diversity in our company. It makes us more successful. So that's really what's driving them. And they saw that, especially in middle management, they had a problem because of mobility. Women in middle management were not always inclined to also want to move for the company. So move to a different location or move to a different country. So at middle management level, the biggest barrier was mobility. And the third is, it's very important to walk the talk and show others that it can be done if you have the courage to do it. That was what one of the female managers said. Walk the talk, but also, you have to be courageous and do it. Then we moved to Sandvik. Sandvik is a Swedish company, and it's a tooling company. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with the company. It's an engineering company, so which means a lot of men, because also, as we've seen in STEM, science, technology, and engineering, it's a very male-dominated area. And Sandvik actually has 18.5% women in the workforce, but they have 33% women at executive board level. So many more. And they have been working on that for a number of years, very consistently. Actually, the CEO was the person driving this change. That's also one of the best practices. If the CEO is driving the change, it will happen in the rest of the organization. So what actually Sandvik was doing, they were creating, guidelines on how to deal with inclusive behaviors. So they would actually model inclusive behaviors in all kinds of ways, and you could actually read up on it. But they also trained immediately all their managers on gender equality issues. So it was driven from the top and then filtered down to the organization, and very successfully. And their main area, their main rationale behind diversity and inclusion was, again, academic research. And for them, especially innovation, quality of decision making, those were the most important things. They said, okay, we see that in groups with only men or only women, decisions might be taken quicker. However, we know that they might not be optimal. So innovation and quality of decision making were for them the most important drivers. And that is also what they use to convince the other men if they are opposing to certain of these policies. They would just say, look at the research, this is what it shows. And then, engineering is quite a brainy type of thing. And then the men would normally, know that they had to leave and not object to it anymore. The other thing that they did, they opened up their internal vacancies. Often within these companies, there is about 90% of jobs that are freely, openly available, so to speak. But the real interesting jobs and the real assignments and the real plum jobs, they are the 10%. They are always kind of organized, informally organized. So what they did, they actually opened up all the vacancies. And although there's still a little bit of that going on, it has produced an enormous pool of talent of women that can actually fulfill these management roles. So also very positive. And I think for Sandvik it's also the case to keep it, because they have now embarked upon this for just a number of years, and now they have to continue. And the last one is T-Systems. It's a German company, ICT company. They're part of Deutsche Telekom. And those of you who know that in 2010, Deutsche Telekom actually put in a women's quota of 30% by 2015, and it was all over the newspapers, and especially in Germany, it was really the first company that did that. And that 30%, they're almost reaching it now, but it also had to come down to all the other subsidiaries, like T-Systems and all the other subsidiaries. So T-Systems was faced with the question, what's wrong with us that we do not have 30% women at top level? And that's the other way of looking at it, isn't it? So what's wrong with us that we don't have 30% instead of we should have 30%? So this tremendously changed the way that the CEO was talking about it, tremendously changed the culture within the organization. And they see the quota not as an end result, we need to have 30%. No, they see the quota as a tool which can actually lead you to break up all those processes that lead to improvement of women going through the ranks. For instance, the recruitment and selection processes, for instance, the promotion processes, that at least one woman is on the list of promotions, stuff like that. So the 30% becomes a kind of guideline, as you will, but it has to be, that's what they also said to me, it has to be measurable, because in business, if it gets measured, it gets done. Otherwise, nothing will happen if there's no target. So that's what they said, and I think we're now in the last minute. I think I saw the last minute. There is many more best practices to share with you, but of course I can't do that in just these 20 minutes. If you want to have the report, you can download it from the website or send me an email, and I'll send a real copy to you, and you can freely distribute it and use it, because that's part of the EU plan to disseminate it as far as possible and to use it and reuse it, etc., etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mirella.